welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hello there. Welcome to 1% Better episode 155. And it has been, or is continuing to be, another crazy period. A few days as I record this on Monday night. Episode will be out on the Friday. I try to get the intros done a bit early. Ireland is still ramping up in numbers of COVID-19 tests and confirmed cases, and unfortunately a couple more deaths, which is not good. And I think in the UK, just as of tonight, they've introduced a much more locked down scenario for everybody, which probably will come here soon. But as we see the numbers come out day by day, that'll definitely start to give an indicator of what the next steps are. So yeah, lots of tough times, and listeners to this show from, I'd say, over 100 countries typically would probably be going through the same things. So all I can say is hope you're doing okay. My thoughts are with you, and absolutely take the necessary steps that you're being advised to take. It seems as if the only real way of tackling this is by listening to the social distancing requests and staying at home and just obeying by those rules and not mingling or mixing with anyone outside your direct family who've been in the home with you for however long at this point. I heard something from one of the chief medical officers of some country, and it kind of just hit home in a way that it's a virus that it's not out there, it's not in the ether really, it's in us, and the only way it can go anywhere is by us transmitting it to somebody else. And it's important to think of that, and the other message of people saying, imagine you already have it, act like you have it already. I was going for a jog tonight just down by Páirc Uí Chaoimh, which is the Gaelic football stadium in Cork, and that has been set up as a test centre for testing for COVID-19. And it was definitely shocking, I guess, but knowing that there's a backlog of tests to be done in Ireland, it probably shouldn't have shocked me. The amount of cars that were down there on a lovely Monday evening, weather-wise, a lot of people in that traffic jam to get in there to get tested, and I'm sure that's just going to ramp up over the next while. So interesting times, difficult times, but yeah, I just want to make sure people are taking on whatever they're listening to, repeating it again and again and again. Hopefully it'll get through to some, because while I was driving down, when I was passing that car traffic jam tonight, I saw on Twitter later that there was a similar traffic jam going into McDonald's to buy their last Big Macs for whatever duration of period of time, and I just can't understand that at all. It's ridiculous that there's a run on McDonald's like there was on toilet roll. And anyway, this is the first interview of season 4. Let's get into that. And the clips from last week were snippets from listeners. This one is an interview, and it actually is one I was really excited about when I recorded it. Definitely still excited about sharing it. It's just everything else in the world that's happened over the last while has probably changed as much. But it's with a gentleman called Peter Kalmus. He is a climate change activist. He works in the area of climate change. He works for NASA in the US. He has a PhD in astrophysics, a highly intelligent guy. He's an author, and he is, as I said, a climate activist. He's really trying to make a difference, make an imprint on the world in a positive way, and the way he believes that is going to happen through climate activism is by people taking action, and he's doing his own bit to do that. During the episode we talked about many things, but obviously climate change was at the centre. We talked about his career, how he actually moved from being an astrophysicist into more earth science, and his interest and passion for having a positive impact on climate change. Talked about turning points in his life, certain moments where he realised he had to focus on this work more than anything else. The birth of his children, that had a big, profound impact on making him look at life through a different lens. And some of the key things you can do to make gradual impact on reversing the challenges we face with climate change. And just to note, this is Peter Kalmus's own views. These are his beliefs and his opinions, and not that of his employers. He did want me to stress that. But it is difficult not to believe what he is saying to be true. Obviously, you do your own backup research, whatever you want to do about it, but this man has dedicated a lot of his life in the last decade or more to this, and it's hard not to buy into it. Lots of really interesting stuff. I won't drain it much more. I'll let you get into the interview. If you do want to become more in the way active around climate, I have shared some links in the end of the episode notes. In Ireland, there's a website, stopclimatechaos.ie, friendsofearth.ie. There's another more general one, planinternational.org. And the reason I'm sharing them is because you'll hear at the end, Peter says how anyone can make a difference is become an activist. I think more than ever now, and it's interesting, when we recorded this was the 2nd of March. At the time, COVID-19 was just beginning to ramp up in Italy, and they started to do some lockdowns. At that time, we talked a bit about it, and I was interested in his thoughts on how this pandemic or epidemic at the time, because people were really taking action because of fear, how could they learn lessons from it for the climate change action, which is in many ways abstract and feels like it's a bit far away and it's not impacting us now. That is certainly not the case with COVID-19. And what are the lessons that you could learn from? Peter believes climate change, the impacts of that could kill hundreds of millions of people in the next number of decades if we don't do something about it. Maybe the activities we're undertaking right now with COVID-19 are setting us up for future success in this movement. We talk about that. It's a really interesting one. Thanks to Peter for his time, and I hope you enjoy this one. And if you're into the areas of climate change and you want others to know a bit more about it, please do share this one out. That's my only ask, and I would really appreciate it. So there you go. Enjoy this one with Peter Kalmus on climate change. And as I said before, I'll keep saying it, please take care and stay away from each other for a while. Good luck. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of 1% Better. And this week's topic is certainly one I've been planning to address or dive into for a long time, but eventually got here, and it is with somebody that has huge experience, an expert in the field. Peter Kalmus, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
So Peter, give us an introduction. Tell us a bit about yourself and your line of work so we can tee it up nicely.
Yeah, so I live in Los Angeles. I am a scientist, but I'm a pretty unusual scientist. I studied physics in college, and then took some time off, spent some time as a programmer on Wall Street after college, also teaching high school physics, and then felt really like I wanted to be part of this quest of human knowledge and contributing to human knowledge. And after 2 or 3 years of working on Wall Street, building trading platforms in a language called Java, and feeling like I was helping rich people get richer, I'm like, I've had enough of this. And so I, willingly gave up a very lucrative path and went back to graduate school at Columbia University, where I for most of my early life, from high school on up, I was in love with astrophysics and specifically cosmology. So I started working for LIGO, the Gravitational Wave Observatory. And I worked with them for 8 years and got my PhD, and then did a postdoc and helped make the gravitational wave detectors better. So these are waves that propagate through space-time actually, at the speed of light. So they're these very, very tiny, hard to detect ripples in the fabric of space-time that come from these cataclysmic astrophysical events like merging neutron stars, binary neutron stars, or merging black holes. And then over that period of time, so my PhD was 2004 to 2008. About halfway through that, I started to get to realize that we had a real problem here on Earth. which was the climate emergency. And, heard from Jim Hansen at one of the physics colloquia. He was working at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, which just was a few blocks down Broadway on the Upper West Side. So just a few blocks south of the Columbia Physics Building. And he said, he gave a, 50-minute physics colloquium, pretty standard, a weekly thing. Most of the physics faculty and grad students gather in this, old lecture hall and hear from a physicist who gives a talk about his or her work. And Jim Hansen came and said, the planet is in radical energy imbalance, and explained how that worked and what we knew about radiative forcings and why there was more energy coming into the planet than going out. And I was on the edge of my seat, and I said, this is like a huge, huge problem. And so I started reading about it, getting more and more worried about it. And finally, eventually, I switched my field into earth science, and I started out in atmospheric science with another postdoc at the NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So I was at Caltech for my postdoc which is a few miles away from JPL, for my postdoc in astrophysics. And I was just getting more and more worried, and finally took the plunge and switched fields, which is a big deal. I was giving up sort of tenure track possibilities in astrophysics. It turned out I basically had to sit on the sidelines for the actual discovery of gravitational waves, which was, the scientific achievement of a lifetime. But I left the collaboration about a year too early to be a part of that, which was a pretty big blow. But I just consider that a sacrifice, a very worthy sacrifice to this project that I'm now a part of, which is to try to effectively save the life support system on this planet from literally irreversible harm. I really want to emphasize, I don't think most people realize that this isn't something that we can just fix later. This is irreversible stuff that we're causing right now. So that's kind of my scientific career path in a nutshell. Now I'm making a switch within earth science to actually studying ecosystems, which was kind of the thing that I was most worried about when I was switching in. So I switched into atmospheric science, and now I'm kind of internally switching towards studying biodiversity and ecosystem breakdown.
Wow. We could probably do a whole series on many of the topics you talked about there, but in 5 minutes of an overview, it's great to kind of hear, I suppose, the journey you went through. I might just ask a couple of questions about that before we kind of get into climate change in general. Always interested in what the motivating factors are in my guests early on. And you said when you came out of college, you worked on Wall Street, you were doing Java programming. Programming would have been something I did very badly in my university years as well. Did you always, even from the get-go, working on Wall Street and doing that, was there something inside you saying this just isn't right, and did you just kind of push that away for a while?
Well, you know what it was? When I was a physics undergraduate, I did my undergraduate at Harvard, I got depressed, like serious depression, thoughts of suicide, etc. And I couldn't, it's very, very hard to do something as hard as physics when your brain is basically eating itself alive and you feel like you're down at the bottom of this deep well. So I didn't have the confidence to go straight to graduate school. And I left Harvard. I basically spent a year kind of mostly doing nothing and just recovering, and also like writing letters to the woman I was in love with, who became my wife. And she came back from the Peace Corps, and we moved to New York City together. And I just wanted to have a job and just kind of like be living life in New York with this wonderful woman, and still didn't have the confidence to go to graduate school. And so it basically took me 4 years to muster the confidence to do the GRE, brush up my physics, ask for recommendations from my old professors who, I felt this sort of sense of shame that I hadn't done well enough with them. And so I applied to Columbia, and the first time I didn't get in. And so I realized I had to up my game. And so I was, down on Wall Street during the day, then I would take the subway all the way uptown to Columbia at night, where I worked for free in the lab of a cosmologist. She was very generous to let me do some kind of pretty simple undergraduate level projects for her. And I also audited a quantum mechanics class because when I was depressed, I actually got a D in quantum mechanics at Harvard, not because I'm a bad physicist, but just because I literally couldn't think, and I didn't even go to the final exam. I literally I was so unwell that I couldn't go to it. So anyway, so I audited this quantum mechanics class, took the final exam and aced it, and got newer recommendations from those two professors, and then did get in the second time. So it wasn't like the Wall Street thing was just kind of a stopgap, and I was just kind of exploring life. And frankly too, I was sort of a little bit just thinking about myself and being a little bit selfish during that point. Still sort of recovering, but just I wasn't fully. I was trying to figure out who I was. I wasn't really at that time aware of like trying to make the earth a better place and the planet a better place, and thinking about other people and their struggles. I was just kind of in it in kind of like a little bit of a narrow way. And then in 2006, also a really big event in my life was that my first son was born. And that really kicked me out of that selfish careerism. And I started thinking about the future on this planet. I started thinking about non-human plants and animals and beings, non-human beings that were suffering under climate breakdown and habitat loss. And I just became, my eyes basically got opened at this kind of, another thing that happened at the same time was I started meditating. And I haven't said that in a lot of interviews, but that was a major kind of opening event for me as well, where I kind of developed a lot more compassion and came out of my own sense of just wanting to have more for me, like I stopped caring about that so much. And I'm just like, man, like life is really short. I'm here for a short amount of time, and I want to spend my energy and my precious time on this planet to just like help make things better for other beings, basically.
No, absolutely. And a lot of things, again, I suppose, triggered for me there. The name of the show is 1% Better, so we're both in kind of a mindset of helping things improve. When you had the depression and when you were down, I suppose, and I'm actually doing I'm an executive coach, and I do a lot of coaching for people to move forward and progress. And the area I kind of really focus in on is the areas of emotional intelligence and EQ, which ties in self-awareness and self-management, self-control. And obviously it strikes me from your experience and from your background, huge IQ would probably be fair to say. But maybe it might have been around that time when you started to look more in on yourself. There was EQ or emotional intelligence development. Would that be fair to say? And was there anything specific you did to kind of develop those, softer skills in a way?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. I think a lot about what I call non-human intelligence, like the intelligence of a tree, for example. Trees are ridiculously smart. I mean, they share nutrients underground through their roots, with using basically mushrooms as intermediaries. And they talk to each other when one of them gets sick and gets like attacked by insects, for example. It'll send chemical messages to the trees in its neighborhood. They even give when they know they're going to die, they give their nutrients that are stored to the trees around them, and they give more of those nutrients to the trees that are directly related to them, basically their children. So they're amazing, but they don't look intelligent to most humans. Most humans have this much more narrow view of intelligence. So if anything, I would say that emotional intelligence might be more important. Maybe it's more closely aligned with what we could call wisdom. And for me, I don't think it's possible to really to know what it's like for someone who's actually depressed if you haven't experienced that yourself. So just the experience of going through that hell, I think naturally, if you survive it, you come out the other side with a greater emotional intelligence. Like I can feel the darkness sometimes at the edges of my consciousness wanting to come in, and because I've been there, I don't indulge it. Like I'm pretty disciplined, and I say, no, I'm not letting you back in, because I'm never going to that place again. Because I know how, once you get in there, it's so hard to get out of there. So for me, the practice more than anything, like I mentioned, that developed it Well, having kids, man, that is a practice in terms of kind of emotional dealing with other people, and compromising, and being able to read the room and to empathize with what other people are going through. But then also meditation, because when you sit and meditate, the kind of meditation I do, and basically it sounds simple, I'm observing the reality of change in both my physical body and in my mind, in the mental part of my body.
Is there a name for this technique?
It's called Vipassana meditation.
Vipassana,
yeah. You basically just observe the reality of change, because we tend to be under this illusion that we can control things and that things are static. I think there's this, we tend to even sort of reject the notion. We know intellectually that we're going to die, but I think we tend to walk around in regular life, and somehow at an emotional level we reject that, and we tend to pretend that we're not going to die unless we're faced with maybe some kind of serious illness or something. But when we're healthy, when we're young, we tend to walk around and sort of feel like we're immortal. When you look at carefully and in quietness, and you can discipline your mind to actually observe the reality of change, just sensations on your body. If you think about what is a sensation, it's the interaction between your mind and your physical body, which is a mysterious thing if you think about it, how we're made out of matter, but we can actually feel sensations in this matter. And every sensation that you feel represents some kind of biochemical change happening in your body. So you get very attuned to the fact that your body and your mind are this kind of constant flux. And something about that makes you develop compassion, makes you realize that you're going to die, because you know that you're experiencing that change at a deeper level than just intellectual knowledge. And that sort of brings all kinds of ability to connect to other people, because it's a shared experience that we're all going to die. Connect to other beings that aren't human, because you realize that you're composed of, for example, carbon that is shared throughout the Earth system over billions of years, and it's recycled. And so you start to really, the barriers between what you usually think of as yourself and other people and the rest of the Earth system, and even going outside of the Earth system, all of those boundaries start to break down, and I think in a really powerful way.
That's, again, a really interesting perspective, because it ties into what I suppose I wanted to even start the show off with. And when I research climate change and when I think about it, and I was reading something recently about, obviously how abstract it is in a way, and how people don't really get it. So if you say to somebody about, somebody was bitten by a shark, they would get really scared of that thought or image, even though it happens 1 in a million or whatever. And even now with the coronavirus, I'm in Ireland, and it's kind of beginning to take hold, and there's panic. People are buying toilet roll like out of shops, and there's a huge panic going on, even though it's an impact of 1 to 3% on average of the population. Still small numbers, but it's more tangible in a way. Whereas with climate change, it seems more abstract, and people think like it's much further away, and it's not really going to impact them, or it's not going to have a material impact on them. And I think when the way you explained doing the Vipassana meditation, it kind of makes that connection for you to really understand how these events and climate change, as an example, will have those sort of impacts. So is that something you're familiar with? Does this resonate with you?
It's exactly right. I've been thinking about that a lot over the last few days. Not to cast aspersions on others, but I think we have evolved to be pretty selfish creatures for the most part. And the real difference here is people are responding they're in emergency mode. Our institutions and individuals kicked right into emergency mode with coronavirus, because people think, oh gosh, maybe I could die. The problem with climate change is they think, oh, someone else is going to die, I don't care about it. So that kind of lack of compassion and lack of connection to others has been, I don't think the average I don't know if we don't talk about this that much. We should talk about it more. It's hard to see how to fix it, but I really think that lack of compassion and lack of connection and this sort of innate selfishness, which is unfortunately pretty prevalent among humanity, has been a huge barrier to climate action. And so one of the things I push for as a climate activist, I'm fairly rare as a scientist activist, but I can't look at the science and then not be an activist. I can't know how things are breaking down in the Earth system and then just, write papers about it and do nothing else. Like I literally can't. Like I have no choice. I have to be an activist. And one of the places where I decided there would be a relatively good return on investment of my activist energy, which is extremely limited. We all have limited time and energy, and we get tired, and we have families, and I've got to a job that I have to try to keep doing. So there's like anyone else, there's limited time and energy. And one of the things I decided was a pretty good leverage point was to push for flying less. And, for a lot of reasons, it's this little microcosm of climate justice because only the globally very privileged are even able to afford flying. A very small percentage of humanity has ever even been on an airplane. It's something that there's no carbon-free replacement for. And we have to, let's be clear, we have to go down as a species to zero carbon. We can't stabilize where we are. We can't go down a little bit. We can't stop at like 10% of our current carbon emissions. We have to go down to zero carbon emissions. So there's in the carbon-free future we need to stave off even further climate catastrophe. There's no place for flying, and we don't have carbon-free planes yet. And it's such a cultural norm. Everyone loves to fly. They love to post about it on Instagram. They think they think it means that they're having a successful career, so they feel important when they fly, et cetera, et cetera. So it's deeply woven into our cultural norms right now. And as a flying less advocate, I haven't flown since 2012, by the way, because it just that level of essentially unnecessary carbon emissions makes me feel like. It's at this point in interviews, it's always hard for me to explain what it almost makes me feel like I would vomit, like this sense of panic that I would feel with going on a plane. Anyway, I can't do it.
You've built up such a momentum, I think, it as well, though. I know that when you've gone, taken that step for so long and haven't do it, the thought of breaking that almost would make you feel, nauseous.
Oh yeah. Sometimes I literally have nightmares where I'm on a plane and I'm like, oh my God, who am I? Like, what? This flight isn't worth it. Why am I here? I got to get off this thing. So it's funny. But what I was going to say is it's been deeply frustrating to me. I get so much pushback from climate activists and from other scientists who still like to fly. They try to tell me that I'm doing more damage than good to the movement by emphasizing what they call individual action, which is not how I think about it at all. I do not think about my flying less as individual action. I feel like it is simply expressing the genuine emergency that we're actually in with my actions as opposed to just my words. And it's been deeply frustrating for me over the last few weeks to see how quickly humanity has moved away from flying because of coronavirus. Where we have this, in my opinion, much, much deeper, irreversible emergency. A bad disease like this, it's not good. And, there's going to be more of them, and people do die. People have already died. It's a terrible thing. But so far, we've had thousands of people die from the coronavirus. I really think with the climate emergency, over the course of the rest of the century, we could have tens of millions or hundreds of millions or even possibly going into the billions of people dying from this. It's the scale here is just of the climate emergency is enormous. And the other thing is we have that. It's basically, we can see that coming very clearly. We don't know exactly how it's going to play out. Like, is it going to cause geopolitical instability that leads to wars, possibly even nuclear wars? We don't know how it's going to play out, but we know it's really bad. Whereas, pandemic's it's a little bit more of a, you're rolling the dice. It could be bad. It could not be bad. Anyway, the point is as a species, we are completely underestimating the magnitude, the scale, and the irreversibility. The climate emergency could beleaguer us as a species for hundreds or thousands of generations into the future. I mean, it's such a large scale of an emergency, and it's unfortunately unfolding over, years and decades as opposed to days and weeks. And we just it's like our brains haven't evolved to wrap around this problem and actually treat it like an emergency. And for 14 years, I've been trying to say to everyone, like, this is really an emergency. And I get, people telling me I'm alarmist. They tell me to shut up. They ignore me. I get stigmatized so much just for, it's all they've been trying to do is ring this alarm bell for the good of everyone. And I get so much crap for it. And then, how do we wake people up? And this coronavirus has been very educational for, I think, climate activists, because now we know just how quickly people can respond, and we know just how quickly institutions can respond. And man, if we could just give that same level of priority to the climate emergency, it would be night and day. And I would feel so proud of our species and feel optimism about the future. Like, we know things are going to get worse. That's already locked in. But if we were treating it the way we should be treating it, it would change the outlook for humanity's future tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I guess if we see over the next few weeks and months with Corona and whatever COVID-19 it's called, that the world coming together and kind of collaborating to try and dampen it down and ride through it, obviously it can be done. That was one other question I was thinking about. Like, well, there's multiple, but one, is there any way you can make climate change less abstract? And I heard others calling it, like, it's pollution, effectively, is making it more real to the layman so that it's something that will scare them now. What are the things you're thinking about that could kind of potentially accelerate action?
It's a great question. I mean, that's the big question, and the movement's been struggling with that for a long time, even before I joined the movement 14 years ago. So I would say two things. Well, maybe three things. Okay,
we have time. Don't worry.
Yeah. So the first one is, I agree with you that so everyone has their own kind of theory of change, and for a long time, the kind of like received wisdom within the climate science, the climate communication, and the climate activist community was, try to be positive and try to meet other people with their values and be solutions oriented and don't scare them too much. I think that was absolutely wrong. I still think humanity is not scared enough about climate change. And it's not pleasant to scare other people, but let's face it, fear is something that we have. We're afraid of the coronavirus and we're acting because of that fear. If we weren't afraid of the coronavirus, we wouldn't be acting. Same thing with climate change, climate breakdown. If we're not afraid of it enough, then we're not going to do anything about it. And guess what? We're doing effectively nothing about climate change. David Wallace's excellent book, Uninhabitable Earth, came out, and it scared people and it helped raise awareness, for example. And there was a backlash within the science community. They quibbled with a few things about it. I thought overall it was pretty accurate, and I was grateful that someone with the writing skills and someone who wasn't prone to basically hiding behind scientific jargon, and kind of taking this tone that scientists take, which I think gives the public the wrong impression that this is like something we have under control, or that we're not that concerned about it. Because a lot of scientists are, but it's a different language. The scientific language is a different language. And if you don't speak that language, you will take the wrong impression. So yeah, I think we need to stop trying to not scare people. We have to speak climate truth and say in words that the public can understand that, yes, this is a life or death emergency. It's irreversible. It's happening faster than we thought. And there's really no way to hide from it. I mean, we're so interconnected geopolitically that if a very wide swath of the tropics becomes uninhabitable, or if India and Pakistan run out of water and food, those kinds of the sorts of geopolitical instability that could trigger is going to affect all of us. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is nonviolent direct action. So we need to, those of us who understand that this is an emergency, it doesn't wake people up to just tell people that. We have to start acting like it's an emergency. If the house is on fire analogy, right? If your house is on fire, you don't just keep doing what you're doing. You don't keep watching Netflix or whatever. You grab your kids, you grab your pets, and you call 911 and you rush out of there. So we need to act like this is an emergency. Those of us who already get that it is a life or death emergency, we have to start putting our response to, and waking people up. And actually, we have to start putting our kids, our own lives, and the planet ahead of our careers and ahead of our fears of kind of like playing it safe. I think a lot of the youth activism that we've seen over the last 15 months or so, it effectively, Greta Thunberg, it would be terrifying for me to speak truth to power in front of the United Nations, for example. And here's this 15-year-old girl with autism, very shy, and she's standing up there in front of the entire world and saying, "You guys let us down. You're saying one thing, you're doing another thing. The house is on fire. We need to act, and you're not acting. And this is effectively genocide against young people." The reason I'm convinced that the reason she's able to do that fearlessness is effectively because she's more afraid of what's happening to our planet and what that means for her future. All right. So we have to start acting like this is an emergency. And one way to do that cuts through, all of the kind of the preconceived notions that people have, all of the noise, all of the social norms, is nonviolent direct action. So basically civil disobedience and doing things that are effectively harmless to other people, not nonviolent, but that are inconvenient to the status quo and therefore lead to you, for example, being arrested. And once enough people start doing that, the system starts to change. Once a police officer handcuffs her, 100th 80-year-old climate activist who keeps saying, "I'm just doing this for my grandkids," maybe her mind starts to change a little bit, and she starts to say, maybe something's wrong with the system. Maybe it's not these grandmas who have the problem here, or whether it's youth activists or middle-aged activists. It doesn't matter. But the point is, we know we're doing this for the good of everyone, and we're on the right side of history. And there's something deeply, deeply wrong with the system right now. And so by standing up to that system and taking personal risk on behalf of everyone, that starts to change the system. And then the third thing, which I think is probably something that is maybe more controversial than the first two at this point, is that I really feel that leading climate activists, not climate scientists, leading climate activists, I happen to be both of those, we have to start living our lives as if this were an emergency, which means, for example, it means a lot of things. We have to get politically engaged for one thing. We have to start doing more nonviolent direct action for another thing. But we also have to start using less fossil fuels ourselves. Because again, look at Greta Thunberg. She has, just like me, she abhors burning fossil fuel. It hurts her soul to get on an airplane. She can't do it. So she had to come to the US, to come to North America. She had to get on a boat. And then she had to get on a boat to go back. And it's just because I know exactly where she's coming from, because it just feels, for me, burning fossil fuel is a deadly substance. And I know by burning it, people are going to die. So I make that direct connection between burning this stuff, getting on the plane, burning that kerosene, or getting in a gas car, burning that gasoline, whatever it is. I make a connection between those carbon emissions and global heating that's going to make the planet get hotter. It's going to cause ice to melt, sea level to rise, more wildfires, all of the climate breakdown we're seeing, and actual real death to innocent beings on this planet, the youngest among us, people that aren't born yet, coral reefs that don't have a voice, trees that don't have a voice, animals that don't have a voice. And it could lead to contribute to the sixth mass extinction, which could harm biodiversity on this planet for millions and millions of years into the future. So to me, I just don't want to burn that stuff. And if you see that this is really an emergency, I think naturally, once that percolates deep into your emotions, and it's not just intellectual anymore, but you feel that it's an emergency, and you feel that getting on that plane is actually harming other beings, including children, you just naturally want to do it less. So again, I just urge climate activists who really understand what a serious emergency this is to consider starting to take reasonable effort. I'm not a purist about it. I still burn some fossil fuel. It's extremely hard to go all the way to zero. But once you start reducing it, you also start to see where the system is failing us and where we need to change the system so that we can go further. And you start you become free more to express what an actual emergency this is. And so, I don't think it's harmless, actually, that leading climate activists are for the most part not taking steps to reduce their emissions and are even, again, chastising and trying to stop those of us from talking about this, that are reducing our emissions. I think that's doing more harm to the movement than people realize right now, because it's sending a clear message to the public that we think that we're saying that this is an emergency, but we're not acting like it. And so they're getting this mixed message, and it's not cutting through. There's so many barriers that we need to cut through, right? This barrier of selfishness, this barrier of time that is unfolding over decades, this barrier that is unfolding over the entire planet, this barrier of space, this barrier of science, the fact that it's frankly complex. It's to know what's happening at the quantum mechanical level with these, greenhouse gas molecules in the atmosphere, how that translates to an energy balance, which translates to global heating, which translates to, drier fuel and drier temperature, drier air and hotter temperatures, et cetera, and wildfires, and how it translates to, stronger hurricanes, et cetera, et cetera. That's all pretty complicated. So there's a lot of barriers that we have to cut through here, including just social norms that most people, especially older people, they live their whole lives with all of this fossil fuel around them and not thinking that there's a problem there. So it's very normal for people to get in the car and drive somewhere, or to get on a plane and fly somewhere. That's what's normal right now. So the vast majority of people don't see any problem with that. And it's a self-reinforcing thing. When someone's flying or driving and everyone around them is flying or driving and Instagramming it and whatever, it's very hard to break through that very deep, strong social norm, right? So if we don't start reducing our own emissions, we're putting ourselves as activists, as messengers, at a severe disadvantage. We're cutting through all of those barriers, and frankly, taking reasonable efforts to reduce. Like, for example, the average person in the U.S. emits around 20 metric tons of CO2 equivalents per year, which is more than twice the average European, right? So for an American climate activist, the average one, to cut her emissions in half is really not that hard. So I'm not saying like go all the way to zero or get crazy or stop using iPhones or even, anything crazy like that. I'm just saying take reasonable efforts to try to use less, to at least try to use less than your average, or maybe less than the average human, which is about 5 metric tons per year. And it's really not that hard to do that. And it's satisfying, because if you get how serious this is, you should want to reduce. You shouldn't want to keep emitting as much. And then again, I think it sends a much more consistent message that this is in fact an emergency. So it's been very hard for me over the years to get so much pushback from other activists, because I keep thinking to myself, man, this is part of why the movement has been so slow, is just because not only are people not willing to take this, to me, like very obvious step to start burning less, but they come up with such powerful rationalizations about why it's even a mistake to talk about this. So again, I'm not saying don't do other stuff, and I'm a huge advocate for systems change. Almost, it doesn't take me any energy anymore to burn less fossil fuels. It's just part of my daily life. So I don't even, expend any energy doing that. All of my energy, like doing this podcast, it's all about pushing for systems change. Sure. And waking, I think we need to wake people up before we're going to get systems change. That matters. So anyway, I just, those are the three things that I think we need.
No, that's brilliant. Brilliant detail and great food for thought for sure there. And before we do wrap up at the end, I'll definitely get some more ideas of actions that people can take from you, from your experience. Do scientists generally agree on what climate change is and what's happening? Is there a broad church of agreement on that?
Oh yeah, it's like greater than 99% now. I mean, we all agree that it's the planet's getting hotter, and that's what's causing all of the crazy wildfires. I mean, it's contributing to, it's making them worse, right? It's one of the causes, but it's supercharging all of these disasters we've been seeing recently: the flooding, the hurricanes, the fires, the climate migrants. We agree that it's a huge stressor to agriculture, and it could lead to problems with water scarcity and food scarcity in the future. And we agree that humans are causing 100% of this. So that's what we agree on. We don't agree on how to solve it, and that's sort of as it should be. I mean, there shouldn't be any debate about the scientific reality of dangerous anthropogenic climate breakdown, but there should be debate about what we do to solve it, and that's where we should be talking. Like, it's a waste of time to talk about whether it's happening. It's very clearly happening.
Sure. And on the solution side, I'm always interested in kind of reading on areas that they identify bright spots or where it's working well in whatever area you're trying to improve or solve problems. Is there anywhere on the planet that you see bright spots emerging that could be replicated across the globe?
I would say for me, the only bright spot right now is the grassroots climate movement, which is getting stronger and stronger, but it's not strong enough. I had a rude wake up call here in the U.S. Just about a week ago on Super Tuesday, when like the next day or a couple of days later, there was a story that the majority of people who say climate is their top issue, a little over half of them actually voted for Joe Biden in the primary instead of Bernie Sanders. And there's a huge discrepancy between both their policy record on climate and their plans for climate and how they talk about climate. Not to mention the fact that Joe Biden has deep ties to the fossil fuel industry, which are completely open. Like you can Google it in a second and you'll see all kinds of crazy stuff about how he takes money from them, how he fills his campaign staff with fossil fuel executives and lobbyists. It's right there out in the open. And yet, basically, people who are concerned about climate were still voting for him. So there's a lot of work still to do. There's still a lot of ignorance out there. We have to wake people up that this is not just another issue, that this is a planetary emergency. And we're going to have to make some changes to our lifestyles, and we're going to have to, change our economy. We might have to raise taxes a little bit, although I think there's a lot of other, anyway, I guess I shouldn't go down the rabbit hole of politics, but, and I hate the fact that I do feel like I have to engage in that way, but to me, it's survival now, and it's survival of my kids. So I don't feel like I have the luxury anymore of sitting on the sidelines with this politics stuff. But there's a lot of work to do, but it is still growing. It's evolving. The youth climate strikes were huge. Extinction Rebellion was huge. There's more stuff coming on the horizon. A grassroots movement like this can't stay static. It has to be constantly evolving and adapting and changing if it's going to grow. But, it's driven by the fact that the planet is getting hotter, and that's causing all kinds of crazy catastrophes like we've seen over the last few years. I don't think everyone knows what they are at this point. And that stuff's not going to, as long as we keep emitting these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which we're still doing at an exponentially increasing rate, although I think there was a dip down because of the coronavirus, but with under kind of normal circumstances, still going at an exponentially increasing rate. And certainly as long as that keeps happening, these catastrophes are going to only get worse and more frequent. That's just the physics here. And so the movement's going to keep getting stronger. To me, that's the bright spot. Mm-hmm. We know how to fix this. We can switch to renewables really quick. We can stop flying really quick. We can, take all kinds of measures to limit the damage and to decarbonize our economy very rapidly if we decide to do this. And that's the key thing. We have not decided. There's no consensus among humans right now that this is even something that we should worry about, let alone, kind of take massive, rapid action for. So yeah. So if I think we're maybe in a transition right now, and a social inflection point where we transition to kind of, ignoring this, blissfully, to suddenly waking up, this phase transition to waking up, this oh crap moment, this is actually an emergency, our kids could die because of this, and then rapid action at the systems level, like no more politicians who deny this, and just we'll only elect people who really, this is my hope at least, that really want massive action, rapid action. Then we'll start to get sensible policies, which really change things quickly. That's to me the bright spot. So we're not there yet, but it's happening. A couple of years ago, I was really depressed because there still was no really climate. The climate movement was so little that it was just a very niche thing, and now it's starting to go mainstream. And we need 1 billion climate activists. Maybe we have 10 million right now. We need that number to grow by another factor of 100, I think.
Right. Look, it's hopefully going in the right direction. And I can't help but keep thinking about what you mentioned as learning from the coronavirus and what's sparking people into action there. And, in Italy at the moment, they're, cutting down a quarter of the country, 16 million people on lockdown, stopping flights in and out. Things that if you suggested doing that because of climate change, nobody would typically listen to you or take that action.
They would laugh at you. Yeah, they would do more than laugh at you. They would ostracize you, and they would attack you for suggesting that. Yeah.
But it's funny that
I know from experience.
Yeah, it's reactive rather than proactive. Like, we have all this time to be proactive about how we can actually try and improve things before the massive catastrophic events really happen. But we choose not to, only will try to react when it actually does happen. And that's what I wrote down here. Like, has a big enough catastrophic event hit the US or some, part of Western Europe relating to climate change that will have that massive impact for people to really wake up, I wonder?
Yeah, well, I still think the non-violent direct action might wake people up more than the actual catastrophes. But I think the catastrophes, they wake up a small percentage of humans who then can engage in nonviolent direct action, which is sort of like, it's like a transmission to the rest of humanity, hopefully. But yeah, I think we're already at a pretty catastrophic state. I mean, look at the Australian wildfires, and we're on the verge of losing the vast majority of the world's coral reefs. So one of the planet's kind of signature ecosystems, we're on the verge of effectively losing it. And we have to start reducing, if we want to have any fighting chance to stay under 2 degrees Celsius or maybe 1.5 degrees Celsius of global heating. It's debatable whether we can even do that at this level, but we need to be reducing at something like 10% per year right now. Every year we wait, that percent emissions reduction per year goes up because the remaining carbon budget to stay under those thresholds is getting less. And we're starting to realize that even staying under those thresholds of 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius of global heating, reaching those thresholds is much more damaging than we thought. So we're learning that catastrophes that we didn't expect until hotter temperature levels we're now kind of forecasting that they're going, or projecting that they're going to happen at lower temperatures. And we've procrastinated for decades. We've known since the 70s quite clearly what was coming down the pipe. And then in the 80s, Jim Hansen famously sounded the alarm in very clear terms. And we've been ignoring this problem. It would have been very easy to solve this if we'd started in the 80s or even the 90s. And we could have reduced at 1% per year, for example, instead of now we have to go at 10% per year, which is almost impossible to imagine how we could do that. But like you pointed out, with this coronavirus now, it does seem like there's a path. Maybe we could reduce that quickly.
Okay. Very quickly.
If we decided to, if we chose to.
Yeah, it's a choice and it's a behavior change, but, use not necessarily use the coronavirus as building momentum, but as you said, pick out some of the things you can learn from it. You released an app, was it earlier this year, last year, Earth Hero around climate change that can maybe make people more aware of what they're using and maybe start getting them to think about how they can take action to reduce that?
Yeah, coincidentally, today is actually the release day of our what we call our minimum viable product. So yeah, that's a great time to publicize that. So this is an app that helps you not only reduce your emissions but also engage in other actions like political engagement or protest actions, and to do so in community instead of just by yourself. So check it out. It's on iPhone. It's on the Apple Store. And it's also in Android. It's called Earth Hero with a space. And the website is earthhero.org. So, and I should also mention too that I have a book, which published in 2017, which is called Being the Change, Live Well and Spark a Revolution. And if you don't want to buy it, it's available for free on my website, peterkalmus.net. So yeah, that's a good resource for sort of exploring where we're at right now. Although, my thoughts have evolved a lot since I published the book. So this podcast is kind of a better snapshot of where my thinking is right now. But I think there's still a lot in the book that people will find interesting.
Brilliant. So you've given your website a call out, and you're on Twitter, Climate Human, at Climate Human as well. Peter, look, thanks so much for taking time out. You're obviously so passionate about this. It's great to hear that coming across. I really hope it's kind of given some folks something to think about. And if there was just one simple action, the 1% better mindset of doing one thing in the next week or month that people can do to start making that incremental improvement, what would you recommend?
Become a climate activist. That's absolutely the thing you have to do. Become a climate activist, and that'll mean different things for different people. But you want to join an existing group and kind of find people that you enjoy being an activist alongside, and then just shouting the need for action from the rooftops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. I'm sure there's lots of links. I'll try and dig out a couple that people can join here in Ireland or in wherever they're listening. But it's an eye-opening conversation, Peter, and I really hope people enjoy listening to it and take action as a result.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on, Rob. It was a pleasure.
Great to talk to you, Peter. Have a great day. Yeah. Thank you, man.
Yeah, you too.
Take care. Bye-bye. Hey folks, thanks so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, could you please consider helping me extend the reach of the podcast that a little bit further? You can do that in a number of ways. The number one way is to subscribe on your app of choice. This helps me with the chart ranking, leading to more folks stumbling across the podcast and checking it out. You could also repost it on your social media channels. Any of them would be great. And maybe even tell a friend in person or over the phone. Pick up the phone, give them a call and tell them about the 1% Better podcast. Tell them about this episode or one that you've heard in the past. Any will do. I would really appreciate it. In the last year, we set up a 1% Better Slack community, which you can join for free and interact with me and other members of the community and improve through holding each other accountable and sharing monthly challenges. It's a lot of fun. Check it out. I'm into season 4 of this incredible journey, and the more of these interviews and solo shows that I research, record and share, the better I believe that they get, and more loaded with actionable takeaways that you can learn from. I know I've learned so much from it so far, and it's always really, really fulfilling and rewarding when I hear from you on what you took from it. So do reach out, rob@robofthegreen.ie. And of everybody that listens, 90% listen and enjoy, but only around 10% actually take action, write down takeaways and put them into practice. I am convinced that if we can move that number a bit higher, the listeners will not only make steps forward towards their goals, but they will be more fulfilled and happy and better. Change doesn't happen overnight. It is hard, but it's all about taking the first step, whatever that is for you. You can absolutely do this. Make a plan, be deliberate, take action. Don't overreach. Start with those small incremental improvements, and over time you will see great progress. It's all in the pursuit of betterness. So again, thank you so much for listening. Good luck and stay safe.